My name is Luke Harding. I am a writer, a journalist with the Guardian newspaper, and this here is my new book, Shadow State: Murder, Mayhem, and Russia's Remaking of the West. It's a sequel to my last book, Collusion, about Donald Trump, Russia, espionage, which was the #1 New York Times bestseller. Essentially it's an account of Russian espionage under Vladimir Putin, of the way in which the Kremlin is seeking to destabilize the West using a whole array of sneaky tactics ranging from murder to cyber espionage to hacking to the subversion of our politics through dirty money to trying to flip elections in a certain direction, essentially using the playbook of the Cold War, but for our new shiny 21st century age of Facebook and Twitter and social media. And my book starts dramatically with two Russian assassins flying in from Moscow on a cold spring day of 2018 to murder Sergei Skripal. Now, Sergei Skripal was an officer with Russian military intelligence, the GRU, rival service to the KGB. In the 1990s, MI6 recruited him as a double agent. He was caught, imprisoned, swapped, and then, as we know, went to go and settle in Salisbury in Wiltshire, leading a kind of quiet, anonymous life and thinking perhaps that the ghosts of his past were long gone. Now, that wasn't the case. These two killers who thread through my book, Petrov and Bashirov, actually really Anatoly Chepiga and Alexander Mishkin, turned up unnoticed, took the train to Salisbury and poisoned Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. Now, this was a kind of traumatic event for the local community and also a kind of major international crisis between London, Moscow and the rest of the world. And you can see two emergency workers in almost these kind of green spacesuits examining the bench where Sergei Skripal collapsed with Yulia. And here, the CCTV footage of the two killers after they'd done the hit, or two would-be killers, walking down the sort of damp, slate grey Salisbury High Street. And there are photos of them as well. They were middle-aged guys. We think they had killed before. They were part of an elite, hyper-secret murder squad who travelled extensively across Europe and elsewhere. And the whole episode was reminiscent, you might say, of the polonium poisoning in 2006 of another troublesome Russian traitor. That's how Vladimir Putin regards people who collaborate with Western security services, Alexander Litvinenko. So there was huge fallout from this. The two assassins made a disastrous appearance on the RT TV channel. They said that they had come to Salisbury because they were attracted by its famous cathedral and spire. And I think what's interesting about this is it sort of shows the way in which, for all of its swagger and machismo, actually Russian spying has become more and more amateurish. And deadly nonetheless. But I also think that the kind of message of Salisbury, if you like, was a kind of up yours, if you like, to MI6, to the British state. It's a country that Putin loathes, sees as a place which is home to the Russian opposition and to kind of troublemakers. But I think ultimately the message of the Salisbury poisonings was directed at Russia's own elite, and in particular the GRU, oligarchs, anyone thinking of defecting to the West and saying what they know. It was a kind of reminder that the hand of Moscow can come and crush you at any moment. Now, the next photo on the plate section is of Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, with his good friend Vladimir Putin. This was taken at the Helsinki summit in 2018, which was notable for the fact that asked actually by a reporter from Reuters whether he would condemn Russian hacking and interference, which let's face it, helped get him to the White House in 2016. Trump said that he didn't think that Russia had kind of interfered at all. Now, this was a kind of astonishing moment, really, because even those prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt could see that his embarrassing, cringe-making public performance really kind of gave evidence in the public square to the idea that Trump was in some way beholden to Vladimir Putin. And I think what's interesting, and what I try and tease out in my book, is that the way that Putin really handles Donald Trump is in the manner of a sort of a veteran KGB officer, which is what Putin is, treating an asset, albeit a difficult and volatile and unpredictable asset. And I think the way he does it is not through threats, through saying, Donald, you know, we have compromising material on you, but through flattery, through sheer flattery. And this is an old KGB skill perfected in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I think this is the tactic that Putin deploys in their private conversations, which we haven't seen yet. Now, the next illustration is of Christopher Steele on the left with his business partner Christopher Burrows at a party to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Orbis, private business intelligence firm. Now, of course, it's Steele, former MI6 officer, spent 22 years working for British intelligence, investigated as head of the Russia desk the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. It's his dossier into Trump and Russia published or leaked by BuzzFeed in 2017, which has really kind of fueled this whole scandal. Now, Trump adamantly denies any wrongdoing, says it's all made up, that Steele is discredited. But I think, and I explore this in the book, that with some caveats, the dossier, which says, for example, that the Russians spied on Trump when he was in Moscow in 2013 for the Miss Universe beauty pageant, is the most compelling and plausible explanation for Trump's strange, weird, sycophantic behavior towards Putin, which has been probably the only consistent theme of his chaotic and dysfunctional presidency. Now, on the right is Dmitry Peskov, Putin's long-term press spokesman, with his wife, Tatiana Navka, on a night out. And what's interesting is that we now know that Peskov not only lied on behalf of Putin, which is kind of his day job, but also lied on behalf of Donald Trump to try and shore up his claim that there were no negotiations in 2016 over a Trump tower in Moscow, when of course there were. Now, one aspect of Russia's kind of remodeling, sabotaging of the world, which I think is kind of fascinating, is hacking. Now, hacking was a big motif in 2016. The GRU were responsible, and we now know that the Kremlin has a kind of what's called a close access team of hackers who roam around the world trying to steal information, data which can be used, weaponized by Russia in its sort of struggles against the West. And this is a team arriving in April 2018 in the Netherlands. One of the figures on the left-hand side is called Alexei Moronets, and he was part of an outfit, GRU outfit, that were trying to hack into the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. And what they wanted to do was to get material which might discredit the British claim made by Theresa May, the Prime Minister, that Russia was behind the Sergei Skripal hit. Now, Moronets is he's a fascinating figure, and what I've tried to do in this book is tell the Russian side of the story, the less well-known side of the story. And in theory, he had a very glamorous job, but we know now that he at the age of 41, took out an advert on a dating website. Clearly, his job with lots of kind of male hackers, guys, didn't give him an opportunity to meet girls. Now, below him is Viktor Suvorov, who is one of my kind of key sources for this book. He is the only former GRU officer to talk publicly about his work, and he defected in 1978, and he kind of guided me through this whole complex story. Essentially, he says the GRU has become a bit of a joke, albeit a kind of deadly joke, because it's part of a wider malaise affecting all of Russian society: politics, education, science, rocket production, and he describes the GRU's recent operations as idiotism. Now, it's interesting, the Kremlin hates the CIA hates MI6, but actually, as I write, the biggest threat to Russian espionage operations these days comes from really a bunch of geeks sitting on a sofa. The geek in chief is someone called Elliot Higgins, who founded an open source investigation outfit called Bellingcat. And Bellingcat have really kind of tormented the Kremlin by putting together videos, geolocation material, by chasing after kind of human sources and unmasking Chapiga and Mishkin, the Salisbury assassins, and inflicting enormous damage to the kind of Russian espionage machine. Now, what's interesting is there's been a huge amount of focus on Trump, on Putin, on what happened in 2016 and subsequently. But I think what you have to understand, and what I've tried to tease out in this book, is the way in which the operation to help Donald Trump become president of the United States was conjoined with a parallel operation which ran in the UK to push Brexit. Now, Putin is keen on Brexit for all sorts of obvious strategic reasons. He is against the European Union. Anything which weakens the UK, estranges London from Berlin and Paris, is good for Russia. And what we now know is that there were multiple contacts in the run-up to the referendum between Aaron Banks, Bristol businessman, co-founder of Leave EU, the pro-Brexit group, and Russian spies. Now, we have photos of Banks after Trump's victory meeting Trump in his gold elevator, tacky shot with Nigel Farage there as well. But we also now know, and I try and explore this in Shadow State, that there was a kind of point man for these exercises, someone called Alexander Udod, who was an undercover spy, who met frequently with Banks and his kind of sidekick Andy Wigmore, introduced them to the Russian ambassador Alexander Yakovenko, and as a very minimum, the Russians had a kind of hotline. They had the inside track on pro-Brexit forces, but there are also allegations denied by Banks and by Leave EU that the Russians were involved in covertly financing Brexit as well. Now, there have been various investigations into this. The National Crime Agency has concluded that that is not the case, but there are still kind of question marks about this. And I think it's notable that Banks met secretly with the Russian ambassador an awful lot of times before finally acknowledging this. Now, the next photo is fascinating. This is another spy or alleged spy based at the Russian embassy over the last decade called Sergei Nilobin. I describe him as a bald, bespectacled spy straight out of a Le Carré novel, and his job was to cultivate leading conservatives, especially Eurosceptic ones, and there he is with the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, then the Mayor of London, at a drinks party. Now, Russian espionage comes in many guises, and I think one of the interesting things about it is that traditionally it was the KGB and GRU who did this stuff. Now there are sort of select oligarchs who, to whom these strategic tasks are outsourced, and probably the most interesting, prominent, and I would say dastardly, is Yevgeny Prigozhin, who in the 1980s, as I write, spent a long time in Soviet jail for kind of being a mugger and a thug and a delinquent, came out of prison, started flipping hot dogs in St. Petersburg, and then became a kind of caterer, and a caterer in particular to one person, to Vladimir Putin, and really he kind of rose through talent, ambition, connections, to the point where it's Prigozhin who funded the notorious St. Petersburg troll factory, which basically sabotaged the 2016 election using fake accounts, Facebook and Twitter, by trying to basically mess with the heads of American voters. And we see Michael Burchik, who was a troll factory executive. We see Jay Aslanov, another kind of troll factory employee, who claimed that the Internet Research Agency is known basically helped to get Donald Trump elected. And there's a little watch that Russia's military gave Burchik as a sort of thank you gift, inscribed from the chief of the main operational department of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Now, Prigozhin doesn't just run a media empire, a kind of patriotic empire that smites critics and contests online space on behalf of the Russian state. He also runs mercenaries. He runs allegedly runs a mercenary outfit called the Wagner Group that have really spearheaded Russia's military operations abroad in recent years. They have been sent like kind of invisible ghosts to Sudan, to Libya, to Syria and Ukraine. I describe them as a shadow army performing useful tasks. And one place that that Wagner has got a foothold is the Central African Republic, a kind of downtrodden state where Russian mercenaries guard the president, where former Russian spies give strategic advice to him. That's a photo of one of these advisors, Yevgeny Kopot, posing with a Kalashnikov, wearing a Russia Today Arabic t-shirt. And it's this mixture of propaganda, of military brute force, of sabotage, which I think explains the comparative success that Russia has had in reasserting its influence around the world and doing battle against what it regards as the main opponent, which is the United States of America. Now, the photo below is of Konstantin Kalimnik, known as Kostya from the GRU, a suspected Russian spy who worked for a decade with Paul Manafort, who was Donald Trump's campaign advisor during the 2016 election, jailed for tax crimes, and I think recently let out because of the coronavirus. But the thing about Kostya is that he was a high-level operative who received Trump campaign data and passed it, we don't know to who, to Moscow, where he now lives. And just wrapping up, we have Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor who spent 2 years investigating the question of collusion. Now, Donald Trump says nothing to see here, this is all a hoax. Mueller's report came out in 2019 and cleared Trump not of collusion but of a more serious criminal charge of conspiracy. Now, my view and the view of other people I've talked to is this was a historic miss by Mueller, that he didn't follow the money or consider whether the FSB spy agency has compromised on the president. And most importantly, I think he didn't talk to the Russians. This is an American account. And the Russian side of the story, which I try and tell to sort of go beyond Mueller in a way, remains not really kind of properly investigated in his version. Now, below him is Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's new president. After Mueller cleared Trump of criminal conspiracy, the next day Trump picked up the phone and basically browbeat Zelensky in what was a bit of an imbroglio, but in essence wanted Zelensky to dig up dirt on Joe Biden, who's running against Trump for president as part of a shadow foreign policy. And this led to Donald Trump's impeachment, his acquittal by Republicans. And I think what's interesting, and my sort of thesis here, is the way in which this kleptocratic Russian model of using the state, using foreign policy for your own personal, private political ends has spread to other countries in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, but most of all, the United States of America and the Trump administration. And lastly, we have Prime Minister Boris Johnson with Carrie Symonds, his girlfriend, now fiancée, on the steps of Downing Street. And one big scandal in the UK has been the Russia report by Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee. Donald Trump is involved here as well, but essentially Johnson refused to publish it before the last election, which he won very convincingly, and the following day he went to a party in London hosted by Alexander Lebedev, a media tycoon who just happened to work for the KGB for a long time and has very good friends in Russian power circles. It was a curious thing to do. We haven't seen the Russia report, but the epilogue of my book gives us some clues and reveals that one of the things that the IRC was told was that Donald Trump had likely been compromised by the Russians, and that there are indications that the Russians may have interfered in and covertly funded Brexit. Now you can see why Boris Johnson would not want this up out in the public domain before the election, and it's kind of explosive stuff. So I would say read the book, read the kind of secret version of the Russia report, which I think this book is, and thank you very much.